Hey there, it's Leslie at Leslie's Cookies and Treats, and today I'm going to show you how to make a 3D toolbox made of cookies for Father's Day. So in this video I'm going to show you how to construct and make the 3D toolbox, but if you would like a detailed workbook with all of the specifications and sizes and templates, you can go to my website at l-treats.com and purchase the workbook. So here I'm just rolling out my dough. I'm rolling it out to a 5/8 inch thickness for the toolbox, and I recommend you use a gingerbread dough that's construction grade for making the toolbox. It'll be much stronger and more sturdy. So I've already pre-cut the template out of cardstock for my toolbox. You can cover both sides with packing tape, and that way you can wash it and reuse it again and again. And after chilling my dough, I'm just going to use a pizza cutter to go ahead and cut a straight edge along all of the sides. If you chill your dough in the freezer for about 10 minutes, it's much easier to cut straight and not pull at the dough when you're trying to cut it. It's also important that you place your dough on a cutting board so that you don't do any damage to the surface underneath. So I'm going to continue to cut out my shape, and then I'm going to carefully lift up my piece of parchment paper and kind of almost flip it upside down so that I don't mess up my shape when I'm lifting it off the parchment and putting it onto the cookie sheet. The straighter you can keep your edges, the less work you'll have to do later after the cookies are baked. So I'm going to cut out that little house-shaped sides the same way I cut out the rectangles, but I'm going to use an X-Acto knife that is only used for food to cut out the curved area at the top. Again, it is really helpful if your dough is chilled in the freezer for about 10 to 15 minutes before trying to do this. It will help it keep its shape much better. So to cut out this little U, I'm going to use an up and down motion. If you don't have an X-Acto knife, you can use a paring knife, but don't drag at the dough. Just go in an up and down motion, and you might need to cut a couple of times in order to get everything cleanly cut. Once you have your little U cut out, go ahead and take your X-Acto knife or your fingers and cut and shape any edges that need any final fixing, and then place it onto your cookie sheet. You're going to need 2 of these sides. And then we're going to need to roll some dough for the handle at the top of the toolbox. And so just take some of your cookie dough and roll it together like you would Play-Doh when you were a kid until you have a long, skinny handle that will fit in the little edges of the sides of the toolbox. When you think you have it skinny enough, take your cutout and measure that it fits in the notch with a little bit of room to spare, and then cut the length for the handle of your toolbox. And that's all the cookies we'll need for our toolbox. Go ahead and put the dough back in the freezer to help prevent spreading, and then bake according to the recipe directions. Once you've baked your toolbox cookies and they've completely had time to cool, we're going to need to shave down the edges so that everything aligns together perfectly so that we can construct our toolbox without any gaps. So to get our edges nice and straight, we're going to use a micro zester so that our edges will be straight and they'll fit together without any gaps in the corners, and everything will sit smoothly and sturdily on your table. So just take your micro zester and shave slowly at the edges. You can also put it down on the table and shave it the way I'm doing here to get a nice straight edge on the sides. You are going to want to do this for all of the sides that will be touching together on the cookie, so you don't really need to do it on the angled part of the 2 side house-shaped pieces. And when you think you've shaved your pieces perfectly straight, go ahead and line them up next to each other and make sure that everything is straight and everything aligns well. You're also going to want to make sure that the cookie pieces are about the same size, so stack them together and line them up. If they're not the same size, use the micro zester to shave them down until they're about the same. And for the handle, you just need to make sure it's going to fit in the notches of the side pieces. And so if you are going to shave it down using the micro zester, be very careful not to put too much pressure so that it doesn't break. But if it does break, we'll take some royal icing and we'll use that to glue the pieces of the handle back together. So we've got everything shaved down, and you should go ahead and save your cookie shavings. If you think you ever might need some moss, you can use some food color and turn it brown or green and use it as dirt crumbles or moss on other cookie sets. Okay, let's dry fit our toolbox together and see how it looks. So you're going to want to grab some cans or some jars to help support your toolbox, And go ahead and put the bottom piece down, and then the front and the back sides up next to that. And then of course the little house piece sides need to go on. Again, you'll want some cans or some glasses or jars to help support everything. And just line up everything as best as you can so that you can see how it's going to fit together, and then use your micro zester to make any other adjustments if necessary. So I told you before that if your handle broke, we could fix it with a little bit of royal icing glue. So just take your royal icing and put a dab at the end, and you're going to push these two pieces together and then let them dry completely. If you have a lot of icing that has pushed out over the top, just wipe that away with a damp paintbrush or your fingers and then let that dry. Okay, so let's start to decorate the toolbox. I'm going to make a wood grain pattern here, and I wanted to show you how I do that. So I have my piping bag and a glass. I've got a paintbrush, and I'm going to take some brown food color, and I'm going to just dip my paintbrush in the lid and then paint some stripes on the inside of my piping bag. The more stripes that you make, the heavier your wood grain look will be. And then once you have it painted to your heart's content, go ahead and pour in your brown icing. And that's it. We'll tie up our piping bag and we'll be ready to go. So let's grab our toolbox cookies and let's get to decorating. So I'm going to cut a hole in the tip. I'm going to pinch my bag together with the seam side up and then cut a small hole. And then I'm going to squeeze out a lot of this food color at the tip that has sunk down, because I don't just want a dark brown wood, I want actual wood grain. Then we'll start by outlining the cookie and then go in a back and forth horizontal pattern with stripes, making a couple of circles here and there for knots so that we get the nice wood grain effect on our cookies. And just continue to go back and forth, making stripes of the wood grain. It's really quite neat how this pattern appears, and it looks pretty realistic. And if you have any icing that's coming out the edges, because your icing consistency should be about a 12 to 15 second consistency, just go ahead and wipe it away with your scribe as you see here. And if you need to fix any of your stripes, just go ahead and pull the icing down so that your lines are straight again. And then take a look and see if you have any air bubbles and pop those, and then put this cookie in front of a small table fan to dry, or if you don't have a small table fan, it can just dry in the open air. Now I want all of my wood grain to go in the same direction, so I'm going to continue to outline the side pieces and then use a back and forth stripe pattern to flood the cookie, again going in a horizontal motion because I want my wood grain to be the same as the front pieces. And then use your scribe or toothpick to pop any air bubbles. And place this cookie in front of the fan. And finally, we'll paint our handle. So you're going to want to put a stripe of icing down the center, and then take a paintbrush that you've dipped in water and wiped all of the water off to brush the paint along the handle. We don't want the icing on the handle to be very thick, because then it won't fit in between those notches. So we're just going to use a slightly dampened paintbrush to paint the icing on until you have a pretty even layer of icing across the entire top of the handle. And the reason why you want your paintbrush to be slightly wet is so that it doesn't stick to the icing, but rather smooths it onto the handle. And then let that dry completely. Okay, so our toolbox is drying. Let's go ahead and make our tool cookies. I used 4-inch tools. You're going to want to look on the internet or your local store for some toolbox cutters. I bought these off of Etsy, but they're not very good cutters, so I don't recommend them. And so you want to find your own. But go ahead and cut out your toolbox cookies from the flavor that Dad likes most. And then we're going to bake them on cookie sticks. So you'll just want to put them down on top of the cookie stick on your baking sheet and gently press them down into the stick. Not too hard though, we don't want to distort the shape of our cookie. And as the cookies bake, they'll bake around the stick and they'll be inside the dough and very sturdy once we apply the royal icing. So just go ahead and cut out all of your tools and put them on the sticks and then bake according to directions. Okay, so our tools have been baked and they're resting on paper towels in order to let some of the butter bleed out before we decorate. And now we're going to move on to our royal icing transfers, and we're going to outline and flood in the letters For the word dad, you're going to want to use a medium or detailed consistency icing for this. And just go ahead and trace your letter and then flood it in. The template for this royal icing transfer sheet is in the workbook, so if you'd like to buy the workbook, head over to l-treats.com. I like to put my royal icing transfer sheets inside of a sheet protector and then pipe the design on top of that. You can also put it underneath a piece of parchment paper or in a Ziploc bag. And then I also like to put it on top of a tray so that I can move it to the side once I'm done piping the design so it can dry completely. And as you're outlining the letters, if you make a mistake or you don't like how something's worked out, you can use a slightly dampened paintbrush and slightly move the line, or you can simply wipe it off and start over. So just go ahead and continue to outline all of the letters and the exclamation point, and then go back and flood those in using your scribe or toothpick to settle any icing down and smooth it out. And if you mess up a little bit, just take a dampened paintbrush and wipe it away or push it over to where you need it. And as I'm flooding in this A here, I kind of went over the piece in the center, and so I don't really like that, and I'm going to go ahead and scrape it all off and do my A again. Even when you've been cookie decorating for a long time, things happen and you might need to scrape things down and start again or fix things sometimes, and I want to show you here just how I'm going to go about doing that. So this time I outline the A and I'm going to let the outline dry while I move over here to the measuring tape and flood in the part that's in yellow. My royal icing consistency is still about a 25-second or detail consistency icing, even for making the larger tape measure transfer, because I want these royal icing transfers to be nice and thick and sturdy so that they don't break when I lift them up off of my piece of sheet protector. And because royal icing transfers can be a little bit fragile, you might want to make a couple of these. Make a couple of the word dad and maybe a couple of these tape measures, just so you can pick the best one and have a backup in case one breaks. And this is the part that's going to be most likely to break off. We might end up having to pipe this little piece of tape measure onto the actual cookie itself, but I'll pipe it here and I will drag some of it into the tape measure part so that it's make sure that it's connected when we lift it up off of the sheet protector. And because this is a medium consistency icing, you're going to want to use your scribe or your toothpick to settle the icing down. And here I'm just removing a little bit of the icing that's over the tape measure body so that it doesn't add height, it just adds some security to the actual piece of measuring tape or ruler part of the tape measure. A dampened paintbrush can really help when your icing is a bit thicker to get everything straight and even the way that you want it. So going back to the A, now that the outline has had a chance to dry, I'm going to go ahead and flood that in, and I'm not so worried now about it going over the center part of the A because the dried outline is going to hold it in place. I like making my letters as transfers because then I know they're not going to get craters, which often happens when you're making skinny little designs with royal icing. Okay, so going back to the tape measure, the yellow's had time to dry, and now I'm going to flood and fill in this center circle with black royal icing, and then flood in the area across the top of our tape measure. And as always, I'm going to use my scribe, or you can use a toothpick to settle down the icing. And I'll continue to flood in the black part of this icing. I'm going to go right over that part of the ruler that I did before and use my scribe to settle down the icing and pop any air bubbles. Once that dries for about 10 minutes, I'll go back in and flood in the white little part of the button for the tape measure and the little black piece at the end of the tape. Put this aside to completely dry, and let's decorate our tool cookies. So I know that you might not have the same tools as I do, but I'm going to show you how I decorated mine. And I'm going to decorate the back side of the cookie so that I put a nice layer of icing over the top of that cookie stick just to further secure it into the cookie so that there's no chance of it falling out. The icing that I'm using to decorate the tools is a 15-second icing, and I'm going to use my scribe to bring the icing out to the edges to make sure that none of the icing overflows. If you're new to cookie decorating and flooding, I also have video tutorials on icing consistency and on how to flood cookies. So this rinse is done and I'm going to set it aside to dry, and then I'm going to start decorating my hammer cookie. Again, using the back side of the cookie, I'm going to outline the top part where the hammer is and then flood that in with my gray icing. I am going to go back after my icing has dried and use some silver metallic edible paint to paint all of the tools a nice metal color. So set the hammer aside to dry, and then I'm going to grab my screwdriver and do the same thing and set that aside to dry. Now I made some tape measure cookies and I did not put them on a stick because I thought maybe I would use that to decorate the front of the toolbox instead of the royal icing transfer. But I'm going to go ahead and decorate that. I want to put a circle in the middle, so I'm going to use my jar of toothpicks here and then just draw an outline around that with an edible marker to make my center. And then using my yellow icing, I'm going to start with the little button and pipe that in. And then I will go ahead and do half of the circle in yellow and the other half in black using a wet on wet effect. So I'll outline and flood in the top half and then immediately grab my black icing and outline and flood in the bottom half, going right up against that yellow icing so that the two colors will blend together there and it will look like one solid surface with no separation between the two colors. And as always, I'll use my scribe to settle the icing down. I'm going to be careful here not to move it too much so it doesn't mess up my line between the two colors. And then I'm going to take my yellow icing and draw an oval right into the black icing and flood that in. And I'll set the tape measure aside to dry while I outline and flood in the drill cookie. Now I decided to make all of my tools red for this wooden toolbox, but I did also make a red toolbox that I'll show you in the pictures, and I'll use the wooden handle tools for that. So I'll show you how to go ahead and make wood handles on your tools in case you want to do that as well. So I flooded in this drill cookie with a 15-second royal icing, and I'm just using my scribe to smooth it out and pop any air bubbles. And let's go back to the hammer, and here I'll show you how to do the wood grain effect on the handle of the hammer cookies. So outline your hammer and then go in an up and down motion to make your wood grain effect. And for the screwdriver, I'll go ahead and outline and flood it in with the red royal icing, and I went over the edge here, so I just wiped that away and repiped my outline, and then I'll go ahead and flood that in using my scribe to settle the icing down. And then I'll put this cookie aside to dry. And I'm going to go back to the drill cookie and fill in this little part by where the drill bit goes. I don't know what that's called. Is that called a chuck? I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm going to outline and flood that in with black royal icing. And then I just want to add some interest, so I'm going to put a black box of royal icing down here at the bottom, and then I'll do another one up at the top. And if you wanted to, when these little black boxes are dry, you could add some words or maybe something with some white paint to make some fun details for Dad. And now to go back to my tape measure cookie, I'm going to outline and flood it in with gray royal icing in a 15-second consistency. And as always, use my scribe to get the icing out to the edges and settle it down. And let's go back to our toolbox cookies. So they've had time to dry, and there's been a little bit of icing that's kind of gone over the edge in a few spots. So once again, I'm going to take my micro zester and just make the edges straight. And I'm going to do this for all of the iced pieces of the toolbox and then brush away any dust with a paintbrush. And once all my edges are straight and I've brushed away the dust, I'm going to take some icing and I'm just going to paint this raw edge because it's going to show when I put my toolbox together. So I'm just going to put a bead of icing down the side, and then I'm going to use a paintbrush that I've dipped in water and I've wiped off almost all of the water on a paper towel and just paint this edge. The reason why I dip the paintbrush in water is because then it doesn't stick to the icing as much and it will actually paint it on. And if I get any icing that goes over onto the front edge, I'll just take a dampened paintbrush and wipe that away. So do this to all three sides of the end pieces of the toolbox, and you can do it to the top edge of the front and the back of the toolbox if you wish. And finally, I'm going to use the same painting technique to put some paint on this middle bar, the handle of the toolbox. So I'm just going to pipe a bead and then use my dampened paintbrush to spread the icing around. And if it's not covering, make sure you go ahead and pipe another bead and continue to spread until it looks the way you want it to, and then set it aside to dry. And then I'm going to go back to my tools because they've had time to dry, and I have some silver edible paint, and I'm just going to paint all of the gray parts silver so that they look metallic. And once the metallic paint has dried, I'll go back in with some brown and black luster dust from the sugar art, and I will add some shading and grunge it up a bit because I don't want these tools to look brand new. And I'm going to do the same thing for all of the tools. And you're going to want to give your silver paint some time to dry before you go back with the luster dust. The paint dries very quickly, so probably waiting 5 or 10 minutes is all you're going to need. Just give it a little touch and see if it's dry before you start. And just go around the edges with the luster dust. And I'm going to do the same thing for my tape measure, paint the entire gray part silver, and then I'll go back in with the black luster dust and kind of make the edges a little dark, like there's some shadow, or just that it's dirty. And again, I let the silver paint dry for at least 10 minutes before coming back in with the dark luster dust. And then I went in and outlined the center circle with some black royal icing. And I'm going to use my scribe to blend the line together where I started and stopped it. There's a little bit of a bump of icing there. And then I'm going to make the words #1 Dad in this area. And I'm going to use an edible marker to write the word Dad. And now, grabbing your royal icing transfer, let's put ruler lines on our tape measure. I'm using a black edible marker to do this. And then, because I'm really worried that this tape measure is going to break when I lift this up off of the transfer sheet, I'm going to use a stencil scraper from the Cookie Countess to get underneath and lift everything up. So I'm just going to gently fold back my sheet protector to get it started, and then use my scraper to get underneath. And I'm going to go from the far side of the tape measure because I'm really worried that little tape part is going to break off. And I'm going to go underneath there, trying to get it off without breaking that piece. And these transfers need to be completely dry before you attempt to take them off of the sheet protector or the parchment paper. And if your tape measure did break, I'll show you how to fix that when we put it on the cookie. And set these aside, and we'll glue them onto the toolbox in a minute using some royal icing. So you're going to want to use a projector or a very thin piece of tissue paper and put it over the top of the royal icing transfer, and we're going to write the words "No one measures up to you" onto our tissue paper. Using the fat end of your edible marker works better. You want the letters to be really wet and you want them to bleed through the piece of tissue paper. So then, grabbing the front wall of your toolbox, you're going to want to line up your tissue paper, and then we will retrace these letters using the skinny side of your edible marker. You're going to want to lift up your tissue paper and make sure that the letters are showing up when you trace them before moving your tissue paper off of the cookie. And I've made 2 different toolboxes, one in red and one in the wood grain, and here I'm showing you how to transfer the drawing onto the red cookie because it shows up better in the video. So I'm going to go back over the words "no one" and "up to you" and rewrite those with the edible marker. I'm just going to use a marker for these letters, and I'm just going to make them a little bit thicker. And then I'm going to take my black royal icing in about a 25-second consistency and pipe the word "measures" right over the top of that outline. Use your scribe if you need to settle down any peaks or bumps at the beginning and ends of your letters. Once you finish piping the word, set this aside to dry. Okay, our word "measures" has had a little bit of time to dry, so now let's put on the royal icing transfers. You're going to want to get some royal icing in the color of your toolbox cookie, and we're going to use that to glue down these letters. So first we'll start by dry fitting them to kind of see where we want them, and then we'll go ahead and attach them with the royal icing. So just put a squiggle of icing on the back of the tape measure and we'll go ahead and stick that down. And then if your little tape part, ruler part has broken off, just put another squiggle of icing there. I'm going to use my paintbrush to kind of wipe this icing on because I don't really want it all to splooge out underneath. So I just want a thin layer of royal icing there, and then I'm going to reattach it to the cookie and to the toolbox just by lining it up and pressing it back down. You could also just pipe this part over again with the yellow icing if you need to. And I'm going to do the same thing for all of the letters and the exclamation point and stick them down onto the front of the toolbox cookie. If you get any icing that does come out from underneath, just wipe it away with a very slightly dampened paintbrush. You want to make sure your paintbrush is almost completely dry before you wipe it away. And to put the point on for the exclamation point, it would be better if you just put a dot of icing on your cookie and then set the exclamation point on top of there. This way didn't really work too well for me. And we finished the front of our toolbox. I think that looks so stinking cute. I'm sure Dad's just gonna love it. Okay, let's grab all of our pieces and let's put together the toolbox. So you're going to need your front and your back and your two side pieces, and you want to just quickly dry fit those again and make sure they're all still going together. And you're also going to need some stiff royal icing right out of the mixer. And you'll need some cans for some support. If your pieces aren't going together, now is the time to make any final adjustments with your micro zester. So grabbing the bottom piece, go ahead and put a bead of icing along the side. And grab the back and go ahead and push that together. And then take one of your cans and use it to support the piece until it dries. Then taking your front piece, put another bead of thick royal icing along the bottom of the front and then push that together as well and grab another can for support. And then I have a bag of detail consistency icing. I'm using this because it's a little bit easier to squeeze in these tight areas. And I'm just going to put a bead along the edge on the inside so that it also will help support and hold the box together. So just go ahead and put a bead along the bottom edge of the inside of the toolbox. And then taking your stiff icing again, go ahead and outline the three sides of the side box, and then we'll attach that on. It's at this point that you want to make any adjustments, so if you need to push the toolbox sides closer together or pull them farther apart, just make it all line up at this point, and then again use the cans for some support. And if any of your stiff icing has spilled out onto the front of your toolbox, you can take a very slightly dampened paintbrush with most of the water wiped off on a paper towel and wipe that icing off the front and back of your toolbox. And then you can use stiff or medium consistency icing to do the inside edges here. Again, I'm just using the medium consistency or detail consistency because it's easier on my hands. And make any final adjustments to get all of your box pieces in the right place, and then grab the other side and using your stiff icing again, put a bead along the three edges and then push that into place on the toolbox as well. And once again, make any adjustments so that the sides are all lining up. If you need to pull it out a little bit or push it in at the top, go ahead and just get everything all lined up and then hold it together with some cans. And you're going to want to let this dry completely, probably at least 6 to 8 hours or overnight, and then we can come back in and put in our tools. Oh, and don't forget to put a bead of icing on the inside. And that's it. Our toolbox is constructed. Don't put the handle in for now. We're going to need to remove that when we put in our toolbox cookies. Okay, so my toolbox has dried overnight, and I'm going to go back with my brown royal icing and fill in all of the joints where the toolbox edges meet with some brown royal icing that I will then smooth down using my finger, or you can use a paintbrush, so that it kind of looks like caulking that you would do on a wall or for a plumbing fixture, and it just seals those edges, and now they're the same color as the toolbox. And I'll do that all the way around. If I get any of the icing on the front of the box, I'll just go ahead and wipe it away with a very slightly dampened paintbrush. And if you decide to use your finger like I'm doing, you're going to want to have a washcloth or some paper towels nearby to wipe your hands off. And then put it aside to dry for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then I decided I wanted my toolbox to be a little bit dirty, so I have some dust from the sugar art, and I'm just going to put some on a paper towel and use a paintbrush, a really soft bristled paintbrush, to put some on the edges of my cookie and just get it dirtied up a little bit. You could leave your toolbox looking shiny brand new, or you could dirty it up like this, or maybe you want to put your kids' handprints on the toolbox. Just paint some icing on their hands and then stick their hands on the sides of the toolbox. That would be stinking cute. Or you can write some dad jokes with an edible marker. Have your kids say, I love you, Dad, and sign their names with the edible marker. There's just all kinds of ways you can decorate the blank sides of this toolbox. But if you want to dust it up like I'm doing, I'm just dipping my paintbrush in the dust and then tapping off the excess, and then just kind of spreading it around in a haphazard fashion. So decorate your toolbox how you want, and then we'll put the cookies in. So grab your pound cake, your toolbox, and your tool cookies, and let's put this together. So put your pound cake onto a cutting board and grab a knife, and we're just going to kind of line it up with our toolbox, and we're going to cut it into the right shape. And once you have the pound cake cut to size, go ahead and insert it into the middle of your toolbox. I like to have the bottom part of the pound cake facing the top because it's much smoother. Okay, and now you want to grab all of your cookies, and you're going to also need a pair of scissors so that we can cut the lollipop or popsicle sticks if needed, and then we'll put this together. So there's no right or wrong way to put this together. Just go ahead and cut your lollipop sticks or your cookie sticks, whatever they're called, if you need to, and then insert your cookies. You're going to want to put that center bar back in and rest it there so that you can make sure to work your cookies around that. And just continue to fit your cookies in the way you want to. Not all of these cookies will probably fit in the box, but you can move them around and play with it until you have it the way you like it. And this adorable Father's Day toolbox is done and ready for Dad to get to work building something fantastic. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you want the workbook with all of the specs and the details, you can find that on my website, l-treats.com. And if you have a bunch of tool cookies left over, just make a pile of tools. Dad's always got piles of tools laying around. Anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. I have new tutorials every week. Bye.